Hey, everybody. Welcome to Let's Fix Work. I'm Laurie Rudiman. Today's guest is Eric Barker. He's the author of Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the surprising science behind why everything you know about success is mostly wrong. This was my favorite nonfiction book of 2017. Eric is a former Hollywood scriptwriter turned MBA student and graduate who now writes a column in Time magazine that takes a science-based approach to success and happiness. And it turns out most of what you know about success and happiness, especially at work, is wrong. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Eric, and I'll see you at the end to wrap things up.
Work is broken. So is the way you think about it. Host Laurie Rudiman is breaking things down so you can put them back together and make work something you can enjoy. Let's fix work together. With the Let's Fix Work podcast, here's Laurie.
Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome an awesome guest today. He's my friend and author, Eric Barker. Eric, how you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as we kick off the podcast, why don't you tell everybody where you're talking to us from today? Where are you located?
Los Angeles, California.
Very nice. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we are on opposite sides of the country. And I would imagine opposite sides of the political perspective in our respective neighborhoods, if that makes sense.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm so excited to talk to you today because this podcast is based on the premise that work is broken. I think everybody in America feels that way, and nobody has fought me on that yet. And I wonder if you agree that work is broken, and if you do, why or why not?
I would disagree. I don't think work is broken. I think managing people, organizing people to accomplish things is a perennial challenge. So I don't think it's broken because I don't think it was ever fixed. I think it's an ongoing issue, and as the world changes, as technology changes, as our relative lives and situations change, there's always going to be problems. That it's an ongoing, evolving process. So I think there are certainly unique difficulties we're dealing with, in the early 21st century, but I think there'll be new problems later. And it's just a matter of, it's like I said, it's like evolution. It's just I think there's going to keep on being new challenges. We'll adapt to them, and there'll be new challenges.
I love it. You didn't pick a fight with me, but you picked like a pragmatic approach to work. So that's probably indicative of how this conversation is going to go, right? Well, let's talk about your book because I loved it. It was one of my favorite books last year, and it's called Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the surprising science behind why everything you know about success is mostly wrong. All right. So I love that title as a contrarian. That appeals to me. So what are some of the common misconceptions of success at work, and what's accurate?
I mean, one thing I definitely think is a lot of people feel like as long as I work hard, everything will be fine. I'll as long as I work hard, I'll be CEO and make $1 zillion and be insanely happy. And I mean, and there's tons of research that shows that that's not the case. That Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford has kind of led a lot of the charge in terms of this, where basically, I think he sums it up as saying, if you work really hard, you can work really hard, your boss might not like you, or your boss might like you, you might not work very hard. It's like, well, if your boss likes you, the data shows that the quality of your work doesn't matter much. And if your boss doesn't like you, the quality of your work won't save you. So
that is depressing, Eric. Oh my God.
So in the end, we have to realize that every level of management has a sometimes significant amount of discretion. The senior vice president isn't really going to look over the shoulder, except in a rare circumstance, of the vice president or the director. They're going to say, should we promote that person or not? And there's going to be a yes, there's going to be a no, and the senior vice president is going to say, fine, go ahead. So if your boss doesn't like you, it's like the data might cleanly show, hey, you deserve it. But guess what? The data's not going to get looked at. it's going to be at the discretion of the filter, and the filter is your boss. So, that's really relevant, and it's saddening, but just because it's sad doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As I was reading through your book, I was taken by how many stories you have about high level of performance throughout the military and how that correlates to the working world. So, can you think of any stories from your book that really articulate some of the common misconceptions of success at work, or maybe some of the pathways that we can be more successful in our organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think to first look at the company you're going into, is really really critical, because as Bob Sutton, who's a professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business, he tells every one of his MBA students before they leave his class, and he's been at Stanford, I believe, for 20, 30 years. He says to them, he's like, when you're interviewing at a company, look around. He's like, and look at the people who work there, because you're going to become like them. They're not going to become like you. And if
Oh,
it doesn't
man.
work, you can't do it, because we always like to talk about peer pressure when it comes to teenagers, but the truth is that peer pressure affects us our entire lives. We kind of fool ourselves that we're always in charge and that context doesn't influence our decisions. But that's ridiculous. Context. If we've learned anything from the past few decades of social psychology, it's been that context affects our decisions enormously, and the most insidious thing about it is we're usually not cognizant of it. And so to think about, what is this organization? If you're a very altruistic, kind, giving person, and you're going to a vicious, cutthroat, taker-infested company, there isn't any advice in terms of day-to-day tactics. You're in the wrong place. So I think to look at it first, big picture, is what's really critical, and that's what. I mean, the thrust of my book is that alignment, between your skills, your signature strengths, your intensifiers, and the context you put yourself in. That's really the most powerful thing in terms of success versus like little minor day-to-day tactics.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. And one of the things that spoke loud and clearly to me with your book is that employees would do better for themselves if they had a sense of agency and they actually felt like they could make choices, or they actually exercised a choice. But I think, Eric, what happens so often in the working world is that we find ourselves in these situations that really demonstrate learned helplessness, right? So we go to work, we're in a difficult situation, and we become almost victims of our own circumstances. And I wonder if you've observed that in the working world, and if you have any lessons from your book on how to or just even from your research in general, on how to pull ourselves up from that learned helplessness and start to take a little bit more control of our lives.
I mean, first and foremost, what people need to do is free up time and energy, because if you don't have the time to be able to really think about this, to correct your behavior, to anything, most people are simply doing too much, or they're not investigating efficiencies enough in terms of that. So the first thing I would talk to people about is just being more productive with your time. And the first step to being more productive with your time is doing the very, very sad, depressing thing of tracking where your time is going. And believe me,
Oh
nothing will
man,
depress
that
you
is depressing. Yeah.
Nothing will depress you more. We all love the illusion that we are insanely productive, and the first thing is to track your time, to look at it, for a week or so, and just take an Excel spreadsheet, and every hour, what did you do? And first and foremost, you're going to find out you're wasting a lot of time, no matter what you think you're doing. And then past that, you're also going to realize that your priorities are not in order. Sometimes you're doing things that are not mission critical, and you're saying, "Oh, I don't have time." Where the truth is, you're doing priority number 17 when you could be working harder on priority number 1 or 2. And then the third thing, which is really valuable, is you'll start to see hot spots. You'll start to see, wow, I never thought of myself as a morning person, but the truth is, I accomplish 70% of the things that matter for the day between the hours of 9 and 11. And then you realize, oh my God, I get nothing done, between 3 and 5 p.m. And then you can start to utilize those. You can start to say, I will do my damnedest to make sure that I do not have any meetings or phone calls or busy work between 9 and 11. And I'll do my best to schedule those between 3 and 5, because I know when I get stuff done. I know when I don't get stuff done. And once you really get a handle on what helps you specifically tailored, be productive, you can free up time. Once you can free up time, now all of a sudden you have the bandwidth to try and make bigger solutions to any kind of major problems you're dealing with.
Yeah, I love where you're going with this, because where you're going with this is really true self-awareness, knowledge of oneself. And I have this working theory that if we want to fix work, we really need to start with fixing ourselves. And so I hear you. Where we start is we really understand where we're spending our time, where we're putting our energy. And I think you've got several examples of success in your book that show us how to have the most significant and positive impact on our lives. So, I like when you talk about volunteering, Eric. So can you tell us a little bit more about how volunteering could change our lives?
Finding a great career has always been a challenge. But today, with the massive changes underway in just about every sector of the economy, in just about every country in the world, finding a great new career is even more challenging. And if you're a student, recent graduate, or someone else early in their career, it's even harder for you because you just don't have the experience that those who might be 10, 20, 30 years older than you have. The answer? The podcast, From Dorms to Desks, a podcast by College Recruiter job search site, where every week we take a deep dive into a topic specifically of interest to candidates who are early in their careers and looking for a great part-time, seasonal, internship, or other entry-level job.
I mean, volunteering consistently shows, that it makes people happier. You're doing good for others. You're benefiting others. There's some really interesting research by Timothy Wilson at UVA that shows people who are depressed, they get caught in a loop where they don't believe that they're living a worthwhile life. They don't believe that they're doing good, and just and it becomes almost like having a political or religious debate where you're just not going to change this person's mind. And the best way, it seems, to change their mind is to stop trying to change their mind, is to get them to behave differently. That if somebody goes out and volunteers for a few hours a week, now all of a sudden it's really hard for this person to say, I don't contribute. I'm not living a worthwhile life. I'm not a good person. And the more you stack up these things that people do, all of a sudden their brain begins to rationalize their behavior, and they start to feel better. They start to feel like a better person because, frankly, they are. And, that's where it really becomes critical. I mean, volunteering's a great thing. The only thing, again, is that I think first is that, I think that productivity step always needs to be first, because otherwise I'm hesitant to tell very busy people to add more stuff to their plate before they've freed up any time.
But wait a second, because one of the things I read in your book is that you don't need to volunteer 50 hours a week in order to gain a benefit from it. What is it? Only 2 hours, right? And you start to feel the net effect, the positive effect of going out into your community and breaking that conversation in your brain. Did I read that correctly?
Well, 50 hours a year, so 2 hours. So it depends. You can do like an hour, hour a week. No, you can definitely get benefits from that. There's no doubt that, the individual can be much happier and feel better about themselves from volunteering.
I love it. Well, anything to break up the cycle of learned helplessness and this negative message that we send to ourselves about our identities and work when we're in the throes of chaos and dysfunction. So, Eric, after the break, you and I are going to talk about more common misconceptions at work. We're also going to talk about the real definition of happiness, as if that exists, right? And what it takes to be successful at your job. So hang tight, and everybody, we'll be right back with more Let's Fix Work. Hey, everybody. I love to brag about my friends. I also like to listen to them. And right now, I'm listening to Jennifer McClure, host of the Impact Makers podcast. Jennifer is connecting with leaders across all industries to figure out how to make a difference at work and in the world. Here's what she's got going on.
I believe strongly that each of us has the ability and the opportunity to positively impact people through our work and through how we choose to live our lives. The truth is that you've already impacted people in this world, even if you haven't been trying.
I love what Jennifer has to say. And if you like what you're hearing right here on Let's Fix Work, you'll love what Jennifer's talking about on Impact Makers. So go to jennifermcclure.net/iTunes and subscribe today. Welcome back. I'm here with Eric Barker, author of Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the surprising science behind why everything you know about success is mostly wrong. Eric, are you ready for round two?
Let's go.
All right. Well, I think many workers confuse happiness and success. And in my mind, they're related, but a little different. So I wonder what you think about that. And what does it take to be both happy and successful at work? And is that unrealistic?
I don't think it's at all unrealistic. I think that, kind of like you're saying, I think the Venn diagram definitely overlaps, but there's some tricky challenges in there. Like when I talk about in the book, I say kind of the definition of success is when finding the alignment between your signature strengths, the things you're uniquely good at, and an environment that rewards those. And that does promote happiness. If you look at, there's research by Gallup that the more time people spend doing things they're good at, the happier they are, the more productive they are, the more they feel respected. Just all kinds of happiness metrics go up. On the flip side, we all know the dangers of overwork. So it's just doing a job that makes you happy isn't necessarily going to improve your health or your relationships. In fact, it can have negative impacts on your health and relationships. So in terms of happiness is a much more global issue for an individual versus success is largely work focused. And I think the key there is thinking about how success at work doesn't, it contributes to happiness in life, but it doesn't get in the way of it. And what some of the research found in terms of people who had found like work-life balance, who had a well-rounded existence, is the issue became that those people didn't have a single metric. It wasn't like money or just being happy. What the research showed was they actually had 4 metrics. They looked at happiness, achievement, significance, and legacy. Happiness is, are you happy? You're enjoying what you're doing. Achievement is, you're getting the promotion, making the money. Significance is, how are you having a positive impact on the people around you? And legacy is, do you feel in some way that you're contributing to the greater good of the world? And when people looked at their calendars and kind of like put the different events on their calendar and said, which bucket does this fit in? You can kind of start to see, hey, I'm really doing great on happiness, not doing so good on achievement, or I'm doing fantastic on achievement, and that's providing a great benefit to my friends, but I'm not really happy. And then you can start to shift hours, shift time and energy investments to get a better balance between those 4 to find something that works for you. And I think that's sort of like those 4 metrics can help people achieve a balance between success at work and happiness in their life overall.
One of the things that I'm struck by when I read your book and when I read your column in Time Magazine is that you often talk about people who are successful in happiness having certain basic things that they do on a regular basis. And one of the things that I believe comes up quite often is mindfulness and meditation. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of mindfulness as it relates to just being happier individuals or happier human beings or even happier workers? I mean, are you practicing mindfulness? Is this something you recommend to everybody? Because I do, if I'm correct, see it in your writing quite a bit.
Yeah, I do. I meditate every day, and I'm a big believer in mindfulness. I think it's one of those things that it's become very popular, and I think most people don't know how it contributes. And I think it's because, again, that context issue, that our context is so influential on our behavior and on our choices, and that very often our decisions are reactive. We're not thoughtfully making decisions. We're reacting to whatever stimulus is upon us. And that doesn't always, in fact, very rarely leads to optimal results. And, meditation, mindfulness can help us kind of create a gap there where we actually take things, calmly look at them, consider them, as opposed to just giving our knee-jerk responses, which are usually very short-term and not very long-term successful. So, I mean, I definitely recommend, meditation and mindfulness. It's just tricky because it takes time, and it's something you have to be very consistent about. Much like, I mean, the analogy to exercise for the mind is a pretty good one. But I think definitely people would benefit from it.
Well, when I think about mindfulness and when I think about happiness, there are two schools of thought, right? There's the science-based approach where happiness, mindfulness, success all comes from a research-based, informed way of speaking. And then we've got people like Tony Robbins and Lifehacker and Ariana Huffington, right, who bring this woo-woo to the conversation around meditation, mindfulness, happiness, success. And I just wonder what you have to say about the culture of self-help and motivational speakers that are out there, because my main competition right now isn't some sensible former HR lady who's running a podcast like me talking about work. My competition is every goddamn motivational speaker out there who thinks that they can inspire someone to change by whispering a few words in their ears. So first of all, can we blame Tony Robbins for some of what's going on right now? And also, do you observe that when you talk about work? Do you see people really struggling with understanding the difference between like self-help and true optimal performance? Does that even make sense to you?
Hey, this is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Practitioner Corner podcast. It's a wonderful podcast about the journey, the paths of how practitioners, both HR and TA, kind of go from high school, college, all the way to where they are right now. Some of the things that they've learned, how they've been successful, people that thrive around them, etc. It's a fun podcast. You'll love it. You'll learn from it. Subscribe to it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, hey, my blog, my book are both dedicated to looking at the science and looking at the research, and I'm very skeptical of these things. But allow me to be far more cynical than you and say
wait, I'm not sure that's possible. But go ahead, give it a try.
There's that old saying that people get the leaders they deserve.
Yeah,
and I mean, people want a magic pill. People want a magic pill. They want a quick fix. I think that, I tried in my book, with the structure of my book to give both sides, here, let's look at the argument. Let's look at both sides. Let's look at the research on both sides. Let's see why this is confusing, why the answers aren't obvious, and to contribute a level of nuance. And while the Amazon reviews on my book have been largely good, there's certainly some people who are quite angry that they just wanted, hey, do X and everything will be great. and that's not how life works.
No.
And so I think there was a fantastic a Reddit Ask Me Anything with an anonymous McDonald's executive one time. And one of the questions was, why doesn't McDonald's serve more healthy meals? Why doesn't it serve more healthy? You're contributing to, and the executive just unloaded and basically said, we've tried. People don't buy it. They want French fries and ice cream. And you can offer them all the kale they want. They're going to buy French fries and ice cream.
Oh,
so,
man. Agree.
I'm not going to point the finger, at it when I realize that, most people, they're intimidated by the answers, or it's going to keep them up at night. I understand, why people look for quick, specious, smart sounding answers that are inevitably wrong. But I don't think, the first finger to point is at any of the self-help gurus. I think people need to say, hey, if this problem was so easy, it would have already been solved. And sometimes the answers are simple, but they're not easy to execute. Sometimes the answers, they're not complex. I think, when it comes to dieting and exercise, it's like, the answers aren't that hard, to understand. They're hard to execute and do day to day. So I think we need to resist our impulse to always look for the magic pill and the quick fix.
Yeah, but I don't want to resist my impulse to blame people like Tony Robbins because I think something is going on, and I don't mean to pick on him, but something's going on in our society and specifically at work where I think we're looking for answers because we're lonely and disconnected. And I see a lot of, especially based on the data around employee experience and employee engagement, there's a lot of really isolated individuals in the workforce. And I love your stories where you talk about the importance of relationships and connectivity and why having friends is so important, but also hard to do after a certain age. So, can you talk about the importance of relationships at work and in life?
I mean, in life, the answer is very simple, and that is that basically the relate other than your genetics, relationships are the number one contributor to your happiness. By far, the
Yeah,
research shows that
that's it, huh?
other than your genetics, it's the largest contributor. To your happiness, and it's really critical. The again, kind of the issue of, like I said, of like work always being a perennial challenge. We have so many technology, and the modern world have given us so many fantastic options in terms of people can work from home, people the ability, speed of communication, the ability to get things fashioned, created, and shipped so quickly. These didn't exist before. They're fantastic. On the flip side, in some ways we are as disconnected as ever, and it's a very tricky balance, but we do need to think very much about these relationships. There's research showing that having friends at work is huge. It makes a big difference in terms of if people have one close friend at work or two close friends at work, it makes such a difference in terms of their happiness and their productivity. And by the same token, to take less of a negative spin on the employee boss relationship, people who get along with their bosses have a much better time of it. They're more likely to be successful. They enjoy their work more. And beyond that, the research does agree with this traditional maxims, which is that people generally don't leave bad companies, they leave bad bosses. So that relationship is really critical. So I mean, if we're going to invest in anything, investing in relationships can really make an enormous difference. Like I said, it's number one.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, listen, Eric, I have one final question. And, you're a book nerd like I am, right? You have an undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania, but you went back and got your MBA from Boston College, but you also have an MFA from UCLA, right? So the current thinking is that a humanities degree is useless and it will often kill a career. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I wonder what you think about that and what advice you have for listeners of this podcast whose kids want to go to these expensive colleges, follow their dreams, major in English and theater. Is that a waste? Is it worth the money?
I mean, that's an excellent question because especially now with the top schools, the prices are just astronomical. So I mean, is it a waste of money? No, it's like if you can make a career out of it, it's certainly not a waste of money. But I think that's the part where
Yeah. Is
schools.
there a future in a humanities degree? Is there a future for someone like me who graduated with a degree in English and no math skills?
I, I mean, certainly there is. I don't. The world is never going to be, all pre-med, pre-law, and business students.
Well, thank
But
God.
but
Yeah.
but on the flip side, it's like if you look, especially at the PhD crush, where it's like where there's the universities are graduating so many people with PhDs, and there are not nearly enough positions for these people. I think there's a gap missing there in terms of most students, and they're young, aren't thinking about the practical realities. Not that that means they need to change their major, but there's an utter disconnect between being at college and being in the working world. And somebody can get a degree in art and become a very successful freelance graphic designer and do the art they're passionate about as well. There are ways to do it, but currently there is no point in the system designated for showing students how to navigate from a career challenged humanities degree to a practical reality, because the issue is the issue is you have to have skills somebody's going to pay you for. You don't have to go to law school. You don't have to go to medical school. But in the end, unless you're going to live with mom and dad, you need to have skills that somebody's going to pay you for.
So let me ask you something. What did your
Yeah.
MBA do for you? Like, why did you decide to go back and get your MBA?
Oh, because I was undergoing through a major transition. I did 10 years in Hollywood as a screenwriter, and for feature films, it's 100% freelance. There are no staff positions for those jobs, so you are no matter well, within reason, no matter how much money you're making, you're always thinking, okay, when's the next job? Because you don't know. It's not a guarantee. So, after a decade of this, hey, I had big highs, big lows, but did I really want to live the rest of my life like that? It was tricky. And the trickiest thing certainly was that I was not at either extreme. I was a working screenwriter. If you can't sell a screenplay to save your life, the answer is easy. If you're making millions of dollars
Right.
and winning Oscars, the answer is easy. If you're in the middle and you can work consistently, but there's still this unease, that's where it's a problem. So I did go back to get an MBA, and that was after the MFA, and it was it was very valuable. I only ended up working, even when I did work in corporate jobs, I was at like video game studios, which are the least corporate of corporate jobs.
Right.
But then subsequently I did that. But I've got to say, to its credit, learning the marketing skills definitely helped me expand my blog and definitely helped me in terms of launch for the book. On the other hand, I wouldn't go back and change my undergraduate major. I don't wish I majored in business earlier. In the end, I did end up, as a writer pursuing my writing, but it's a very tricky challenge. And now with the costs of college, I understand why parents are concerned.
One of the top questions I get and I have not worked in human resources for over a decade, and yet, I have a big fan base from the world of human resources and recruiting and marketing as well. And the number one question I get, and I get it daily, is, should I go back and get my MBA? And so I'm not ever really sure how to answer that, because not all MBAs are created equally. That's the other complexity. So an MBA from Wharton is different than an MBA from a for-profit institution. So as we wrap the show up, I wonder if you have any insight or advice to pass along to listeners who may be in the middle of their career. They're not speechwriters or screenwriters or doing anything creatively, but they're working in marketing or sales, and they're making enough money, but they're wondering if they should go back to school and get that MBA to expand their opportunities. Have anything to say to those individuals?
Absolutely. I mean, there is research on this, which first and foremost, the majority of the benefit that you get from an MBA is signaling. In other words, it's not the things you learn. It is the piece of paper and people's recognition of that piece of paper. Not to devalue that signal can be very important. And ceteris paribus, all things being equal, I think most employers would cover their butt and promote the person with the MBA over the person without the MBA.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But, it's like there are things to take into consideration, which is, how much does the MBA cost? How hard is that going to be to get? If you go full time, you're giving up 2 years of employed income. What's that worth? So there is that issue. In some arenas, like sales, an MBA doesn't matter at all. If you look at a company and you see that all the senior people have MBAs, that should probably be a clear signal to you that formalized or informally, you're probably going to need it to get there. But the other critical thing, I think, is exactly what you said, which is, if you can get into a top 10 MBA program, that can be a world changer. If it's outside of a top 10, then again, 2 years, 3 years part-time out of your life, those extra hours, do that's going to pay off? Or are you just reaching or you just feel like you're drowning and you're reaching for anything, to not go under? I think it's something that people need to think about. If you need that to get promoted, and that's quite clear, if you can get into a top 10 program, that's definitely going to improve your situation, but it's not the answer for everybody, especially considering the time and expense.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. I often tell people to contact their EAP or go to therapy and try to figure out exactly what's driving them to get their MBA. Like figure out that core issue. And then, again, what I'm doing is trying to promote self-awareness, right? Figure out what's driving you and then answer your own question that way. And maybe don't ask a blogger what she thinks, but that's just me, I don't know. So anyway, well, Eric, it was really great to have you on today's episode. Listen, where can people find you on the internet?
My book is available on Amazon and everywhere else that sells books. The URL to my blog is quite challenging as it's Japanese. So if people just search for Eric Barker blog, they'll find it via Google. But I'm posting new research into happiness, productivity, negotiation, relationships every week. So the best way to keep up with what I'm doing is to go to my blog and sign up for my weekly newsletter.
Yeah, I highly recommend your newsletter. That's how I found you, and I really enjoy it. Well, Eric, it's been a real pleasure having you on Let's Fix Work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. You can find Eric Barker at the website Bake It. Well, it's kind of a complicated website, as he just said. I don't know why he picked the URL, but you can just Google Eric Barker blog, and you can find him and connect with him, as well as connect with him on LinkedIn. And while you're at it, you can find me at L. Rudiman or Let's Fix Work. Let's Fix Work is a production of One Stone Creative. You could find Audra Casino and Megan Doherty easily on the internet. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And while you're at it, leave us a 5-star review. If you don't want to leave us a 5-star review, just send me some email and give me feedback. I'm at hello@letsfixwork.com. That's all for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time on Let's Fix Work.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Let's Fix Work. Wouldn't you love to get your hands on Laurie's no-holds-barred, honest HR handbook for employees and pros alike? Download it for free at laurierudiman.com/DIYHR.